Here's what almost nobody says out loud about Harley-Davidson in the 1970s, and it's the whole story of this video. By nearly every measurable standard, these were some of the most difficult machines Harley ever built. They vibrated. They leaked. They demanded constant attention. The company that built them was owned, famously and infamously, by a corporation that made bowling equipment, a story I've told in full on this channel. And the men who rode them loved them harder than any generation of owners has loved any machine before or since. The bond built in those 1970s garages didn't just survive the decade. It's the reason the company survived at all. Both things are true. And to understand how, you have to see what owning a Harley in 1970s America actually looked like. The machine, the money, the Saturday rituals, and the world that grew up around all of it. Let's go back. Start with the motorcycle itself, because in the 70s, the motorcycle was not a possession. It was a relationship. The engine of the era was the shovelhead, the big V-twin that powered Harley's heavyweights from the mid-60s into the mid-80s, named for the shape of its rocker covers, which somebody long ago decided looked like coal shovels turned upside down. It made its power low and lazy, shook the whole machine at idle like something impatient, and announced itself 3 blocks before you saw it. Starting one was a liturgy. Many still kicked, and kickstarting a big Harley was a full-body commitment with a known failure mode, the kickback that could send a careless man over the handlebars or limp him for a week. You learn the ritual: ignition, choke set just so, find the compression stroke, rise up, and throw your whole weight down through your boot. And when she caught, the whole garage knew it. Electric start existed, and plenty of the old guard regarded it with the suspicion working men reserve for anything that makes a thing too easy. And the maintenance. Understand that maintenance in the 70s wasn't something that happened to the motorcycle at a dealership twice a year. It was the rhythm of ownership. Points to gap, chain to adjust, and oil. Primary to check. Tappets to set by ear and feel. The toolkit didn't live in the garage. It lived on the bike, under the seat, or in a saddlebag. Because you would need it, not might, would, somewhere out on the road. And so would a stranger. And stopping for a stranded rider wasn't kindness. It was law. The leaks? Every shovelhead man has the same joke. And in 1974, it was already old. A Harley doesn't leak. It's marking its territory. You put down cardboard. You checked your oil the way other men checked their watch. And here's the thing the spec sheet crowd never understood. None of this drove the owners away. It bound them closer. Because a machine that demands your hands, your attention, and your Saturday mornings becomes something no appliance ever becomes. It becomes yours. And then there was the sound. And if you've seen my video on why American and Japanese motorcycles sound nothing alike, you know this deserves its own moment. That lumpy, syncopated, 45-degree idle rolling down a 1970s Main Street wasn't noise to the man in the saddle. It was his signature. Neighbors knew he was home before his boots hit the driveway. His wife could pick his bike out of a pack of 20 at a quarter mile, and so, he liked to believe, could everyone else in town. In a decade when a working man's individuality got sanded down 40 hours a week on somebody's line, the sound of his Harley was the loudest thing in his life that belonged entirely to him. Winter deserves a word too, because the 70s Harley calendar had seasons like a farm. In the snow states, November meant the ritual in reverse. Battery out and onto the trickle charger in the basement, fuel stabilized, the machine up on boards, covered with an old bedsheet like furniture in a shuttered house. And all winter, the garage still got visits. A man standing in the cold with a beer, lifting the corner of the sheet, checking on it. Ask any northern rider of that era what March smelled like, and he'll tell you solvent, fresh oil, and possibility. The first spring startup was a neighborhood event. Some years it was practically religious. Now the arithmetic, because you can't understand 70s Harley culture without understanding whose paychecks paid for it. A new Harley-Davidson Big Twin at the start of the decade ran in the neighborhood of $2,000. Call it a couple of months' gross pay for a man on a good factory wage, more for most. That was serious money, but it was reachable money. A winter of overtime, a tax refund, a loan co-signed at the credit union where the loan officer knew your foreman. The men writing those checks worked assembly lines in Ohio, mills in Pennsylvania, refineries on the Gulf Coast, loading docks everywhere. I've covered those worlds region by region on this channel. The coal country riders, the Texas oil boom riders, and the common thread was always the same. The Harley was the working man's one extravagance, bought with hours of his life, and he knew exactly how many. And the decade kept adding riders from one more source. Young men coming home from Vietnam by the hundreds of thousands, many of them trained on machines, carrying restlessness that a sedan could not answer. For a lot of them, the bike was the therapy. Nobody offered any other way, the wind as medicine, the highway as the only room big enough. That's not romance talking. Ask any of them. Plenty are watching this right now. Then, in 1973, the world handed the motorcycle an argument nobody expected: the oil crisis. Gas lines around the block, prices leaping, Detroit's 8-miles-a-gallon barges suddenly looking like anchors, and a motorcycle sipping fuel started making sense to men who'd never considered one. The 70s put more Americans on two wheels than any decade before it, and while plenty bought the cheaper imports, the ones who bought Harleys were making a different kind of purchase entirely. Which brings us to what they were actually buying. Because a 70s Harley came with something no spec sheet listed: a world. It started at the dealership, and if you rode then, you remember exactly what I mean, because I made a whole video walking through it. The Harley shop of the 1970s was not a retail environment. It was a clubhouse with a cash register. The floor guy had grease under his nails and would talk you out of the wrong bike. The parts man kept an unofficial shelf of used components for anyone thin that month and handed you a 30-cent washer for free because you'd be back. Deals closed on handshakes. Coffee was burnt and endless. Your name was known before your second visit. From there, the world widened. The vest, the cut, with club colors for some, but for most just patches that told your story, where you'd ridden, what you'd survived, who you rode with. The clubs themselves. And let's be honest, the way this channel is always honest. The 1%ers were real, and I've told those stories straight, but they were always the loud minority. The overwhelming body of 70s Harley culture was AMA clubs, church parking lot poker runs, toy runs at Christmas, and Sunday packs of ordinary men whose greatest crime was noise. The rituals held it together. The wave between riders, low, 2 fingers, never showy, a code that said, "I see you, brother," between strangers at 60 miles an hour. The roadhouse stops where the bikes lined up out front, nose out. The runs that structured the calendar, local rides in spring, and for the devoted, the great pilgrimages, Daytona in March, and in August, the long haul to a little South Dakota town where in 1970, 3,500 riders still camped free in the city park. I've told the whole Sturgis story elsewhere. What matters here is what those runs meant. You rode there, every mile, because the ride was the point, and arriving on a trailer would have made about as much sense as mailing yourself to church. And the culture had more women and family in it than the movie version ever admits. The passenger seat mattered. The wife or girlfriend who rode every Sunday, arms around a denim jacket, who could read the road through the pegs as well as he could through the bars. Some of them graduated to their own machines and rode at the front, decades before anyone called it a movement. Kids grew up washing the bike for a quarter, falling asleep to the sound of dad coming home on it, learning the names of parts before the names of presidents. For every outlaw the newspapers photographed, there were 100 families where the Harley sat in the driveway between the station wagon and the lawnmower, the wildest member of the household and the most loved. And hovering over the whole decade, one movie. Easy Rider hit in 1969, and through the early 70s, its aftershock turned 10,000 garages into chopper shops, front ends raked out, sissy bars up, tanks repainted in metal flake by men who had never painted anything but a fence. Most of the bikes getting chopped were Harleys, often old ones bought cheap, and whatever the purists muttered, understand what that scene really was. Working men transforming their machines with their own hands, the exact same instinct as the Saturday maintenance, turned up to art. That was the world. And in the middle of the decade, that world came under siege from two directions at once. Here's the part of the 70s story that makes the loyalty astonishing instead of merely warm. Because while all of this was happening, the poker runs, the garage Saturdays, the company at the center of it, was in the worst trouble of its life. Harley-Davidson spent the entire decade owned by AMF, the sporting goods giant the whole world knew for bowling equipment. The full story, the takeover threat that forced the sale, the production quotas, the quality collapse, is its own video on this channel, and it's the one I'd send you to next. What matters here is what it felt like from the saddle. Production multiplied, corners got cut, and the machines of the mid-70s came off the line with problems even the faithful couldn't pretend away. It got bad enough that some riders famously took sandpaper to their own tank badges, removing the corporate owner's name from the machine they loved, while keeping the machine. Sit with that image. That's not a customer relationship. That's a family protecting its name from a bad marriage. And at the exact same time, the other front, the Japanese arrival. Honda's four-cylinder revolution and everything that followed it. Machines that were, by the numbers, faster, smoother, cheaper, and dramatically more reliable than anything Milwaukee was shipping. I've told that story from the Japanese side in these pages too, and fairness demands the plain truth. On paper, in the 70s, choosing a Harley over a Japanese bike was objectively hard to defend. So millions chose the imports. And the Harley men, the ones in these garages, at these dealerships, on these runs, looked at the same arithmetic, understood it perfectly, and stayed anyway. Some of them stayed on a budget too, because the 70s also ran a thriving parallel economy the brochures never mentioned: the used Harley. The panheads and early shovelheads of the 50s and 60s circulated through classified ads and shop bulletin boards at prices a young man could survive. Rough, honest machines that needed work, which was, of course, the point. Plenty of the decade's most devoted riders never bought a new Harley in their lives. They bought somebody's project, finished it, rode it a decade, and passed it on. Try that with an appliance. The machines moved through the community like heirlooms with license plates, and every man who brought one back to life felt, correctly, that he'd earned his place at the diner in a way no checkbook could buy. Don't let anyone tell you they stayed out of ignorance. They stayed because they weren't buying transportation. They were buying membership in everything this video has shown you. The ritual, the world, the brotherhood, the sound, the identity welded to a tank badge their own company was busy tarnishing. It was, by every measurable standard, the wrong choice. And it was, by every standard that actually governs a man's life, entirely rational. Some purchases are arguments about who you are. The 1970s Harley man won his argument every single Saturday morning. So let's say it cleanly, both halves. The 1970s gave Harley riders some of the roughest machines the company ever produced, under the worst ownership in its history, a decade of leaks, vibration, quality escapes, and a corporate parent from the bowling alley. Nobody who was there romanticizes the mechanical truth, and the ones who claim their AMF-era bike never broke are telling you a story. And the 1970s built the deepest owner loyalty in the history of American machines, precisely because of all that. The difficulty was the bond, every roadside fix, every Saturday of maintenance, every mile completed on a machine you personally kept alive was a deposit in an account no reliable appliance ever opens. The Japanese bikes of the 1970s were better motorcycles. The Harleys were better stories, and men live inside stories. And here's the payoff of the whole decade, the part that reframes everything. When 13 executives borrowed $80 million in 1981 to buy Harley-Davidson back from AMF, the rescue I've told in full, the asset they were really buying wasn't the factories or the tooling. It was the loyalty manufactured in these 1970s garages by these men, one oil spot and one poker run at a time. The customers who wouldn't leave when leaving made perfect sense. That was the treasure. Everything Harley became afterward, the comeback, the mystique, the brand worth billions, was built on a foundation poured by working men on garage floors in the 1970s. And most of them never got so much as a thank you card. They didn't save the receipts. They saved the company.